I'm gonna start on a depressing note today. My plan is let's dig a little emotional hole in the beginning and see how far away we can get out of it by the end of the conversation.
Okay.
Um, so it's been a year since the war started, and we talked about it at the time. I was still in Russia, and looking back at this year, it hasn't been a good one. The war is going on. It's not clear who's winning. The good thing is Ukraine stands. Ukraine hasn't been captured. The bad thing, it's been a year of cities being destroyed, people being killed, people being tortured, and that's military personnel and civilians. People being kidnapped. There are children who lost their parents in the war and were brought to Russia and are now being used for propaganda purposes. So, an incredible suffering on the part of Ukrainians that is going on, and it's not clear how long it's gonna continue for. Then, a part of Russia, it's a complete degradation, as far as I can see, of the state of the country. It's full blown fascist state, as far as I'm concerned. The latest little story that I saw, I was just reading this today. There's like a single father whose daughter drew an anti-war picture at school, and FSB showed up, and the father is under house arrest now, and the girl is in a government facility, like a foster home. And
Wow.
I think they were supposed to let her out, but didn't. And I don't know if they're going or not. And it's just a one small story out of many, many stories of that sort. There are people who are serving jail sentences, long jail sentences for saying something anti-war, or even calling a war, because it's supposed to be a special operation. So it's not good. And then on a more personal note, it's been almost a year since I left Russia, and early on, one of the things that I remember saying, we were at this bar in Yerevan, and there was this obnoxious drunk Russian. Luckily, the only person of that sort that we've seen here so far, but there was this annoying guy who wanted to challenge us on our views and decisions, and, well, why did you leave? And one thing I told him was, I think my country is committing atrocities, and I think my country is going to a very, very dark place itself. And I can't imagine staying in Russia and just like putting the blinders on and pretending nothing is happening and living my own life. And instead, I would want to do something about this. And I can't see what a person can do from inside of Russia, because you would just quickly put to jail if you try something. And so I said, I hope that I could be of more use on the outside. And I believe that, and I still believe that, but it's been almost a year. I can't say that I've been very useful. The most practical thing that I've have been doing is I donate money to buy humanitarian aid for Ukraine. And that's not nothing. All of these donations from people all over the world taken together, that makes a difference. That's a valuable contribution, but that's taken together. My single contribution is not a game changer. And so this has been on my mind today as I was preparing for this conversation. I thought, one thing that I haven't done is like rent an office space with a whiteboard and get the smartest people I know together and try to think about this as like it's a project. What do we do about this war? What do we do about Putin's regime? How can we help in measurable ways? And so that not to make this, all about myself and hear you say, don't be too hard on yourself or something, I'm going to generalize this. almost nobody I know is doing anything like that, either about this problem or about a different problem that is central to their thinking. So, like, most people I know are trying to live their lives, and that's a struggle enough, right? People are trying to keep a job, people are trying to keep paying their bills and maintain relationships, uh, and not get depressed, and just go about their life, and that is difficult. Like, I'm not diminishing that, but almost none of us are making a concentrated effort, like a real concentrated effort, to solve some big problem that they see, or work on a real ambitious project. Um, and there are people who are trying to do that, like our shared friend Bob Wright. If you ask him, what do you think are the biggest challenges humanity is facing today, he's going to have an answer, and his work is dedicated to addressing those questions. But then if you ask him, what sizable accomplishments have you made in the last 10 years to address those questions, his answer, he's going to be modest in his answer. Uh, I can speculate from having known him that he would say, I'm trying to do my best, and all you can do is hope that there's some consequence. You don't ever know the full extent of your actions. Maybe some seed you planted somewhere is going to make a difference in ways you haven't anticipated. But that is not how we work at our jobs as middle managers. Like, I have a job. I work as creative director for the Glenn Show, and Glenn doesn't even have to ask me, like, what have you done in the last year, and what effects has that have, because he knows, like, he observes the dynamics of our operation. I know, and I deliver those reports to him, and they're data driven. Like, here's what we've done, here's what didn't work, here's what worked, here's the chart for subscriber growth and revenue growth. And there's nothing approximating anything like that when it comes to the things that we would point to as the biggest, most important challenges we are facing. So that's my hole that I'm digging out at the beginning of the conversation. I don't know if I have a question here, but this is what I've been thinking about: this felt sense of powerlessness in the face of what we see as the most important issues at hand. And I'm not satisfied with just accepting that powerlessness as, like, well, it's, what do you do about the war? I don't have an answer, but I also haven't spent 300 hours or something actively trying, like, in rooms with people, brainstorming, writing things down, trying different approaches, figuring out what worked and what didn't. And almost nobody I know is doing that. And those people that I've been in situations like that, in, like, activist groups, and most of them are not impressive. And most of them, even though they get together in the room, they mostly just talk in circles, and I don't see a real, promising effort of that sort. Certainly on this war issue, or, like, toppling Putin. I mean, there have been impressive attempts at combating Putin's regime. I've been a part of those movements. Those people are in jail, dead, or exiled.
So this is a really big issue. It is, I'd say it's specific to the war in Ukraine, but you're talking about a much a bigger issue that's confronted by anybody who considers, all people who consider themselves, I don't know, intellectuals. It's kind of a pretentious term, but people who look at the world and think about it and then have things to say about it. What's your reaction? And then you're trying to write these things that people will. I mean, you want to be read first of all, and then you want to make a difference. You want to possibly change people's minds. And
I would say I'm not only talking about the quote unquote intellectuals. Just like everybody I know, good people, right? Aware of the various problems the world is facing, or it doesn't even have to be a problem. It might be something positive. Like, I would really love to see this happening in the world, but most
yeah,
of us are not doing much
okay.
to
Well,
advance
let me just
those
talk.
issues.
Let me just talk about the situation for writers and for myself. I'll deal with
Right.
this in a kind of self-absorbed way at first. So, I'm a science writer, so I used to write about things like the search for a theory of everything and a unified theory and maybe a theory of consciousness, and those sorts of questions really absorbed me. And then, and especially in the 1990s, I thought dwelling on these issues is morally okay because the Cold War had ended and
Mm-hmm.
humanity is entering a new period of peace and prosperity. So, morally, it's okay to focus on these esoteric intellectual questions. And then 9/11 happened, and my
Mm-hmm.
country invaded Afghanistan and Iraq and just started throwing its weight around the world and killing massive numbers of civilians and forcing a lot of people to become refugees. And so a war, which has obsessed me since I was a little kid and first learned about the possibility of nuclear annihilation, and then had to deal with the Vietnam War. I was had a draft card. I was eligible to go to Vietnam War. I had to think about war, and I've never stopped thinking about it. It's just in the 90s, it went down on my list of priorities for things that I felt obliged to think about. And all of a sudden, after 9/11, it shot up to the top of my list of priorities, and I that's when I realized that most people were very pessimistic about ending war once and for all. And I felt it was my moral obligation to try to persuade people to be optimistic and to encourage some kind of mobilization against war in general, not just the wars of the United States, but
Right.
wars in general. And I'm still trying to do that, but then it becomes kind of an egotistical thing. So I wrote this book, The End of War, and very few people read it. I've heard from fans of the book. It hasn't had a zero effect, and I got on a couple of TV shows, but yeah, there hasn't been like a global anti-war movement provoked by my little book. I continue to write about war now and then. I wrote about it ad nauseum for Scientific American. Whenever there was a new war breaking out, or the United States would be withdrawing from Iraq or Afghanistan, I thought, okay, here's a chance for me to trot out my end of war thesis. And generally, those are the least read of
Mm-hmm.
my pieces. So, but let me be more specific here. With the war in Ukraine, I think people, and I think this, I, my assumption is I've only read a few of Bob Wright's pieces on the war in Ukraine. I think his position is we've got to end this thing. This is terrible. We've got to come to some sort of reconciliation, reach a peace treaty. That is not a popular opinion right now. And
Right.
so the peaceniks are tied up in knots trying to figure out what to do. Oh, well, what are you saying? Ukraine should just surrender and let the Russians occupy it? Uh, and I, I that's kind of what I thought in the beginning, that war is so horrible that it's better for Ukraine to submit to the Russian aggression and then try to counter it uh, nonviolently afterwards to avoid an all-out war, which is the situation we have now, which has led to the deaths of tens of thousands of people and enormous destruction. So if you're talking about what to do, what people can do, what both writers can do and anybody can do inside Russia, inside Ukraine, anywhere else around the world, the problem is people, I think, are morally confused. Even I am morally confused. I advocate nonviolence, and I advocate some kind of position that's consistent with the idea of war ending entirely at some point in the near future. But it's difficult to think what the best way is to get to this state that I envision of the end of war. Is it to completely defeat and humiliate Russia so that it never tries this again and no other state tries to pull off something like this again, this invasion of Ukraine? Okay, well, that'd be fine, but humiliating Russia still leaves the United States intact. The United States with its giant war machine, which dwarfs what Russia has.
And it still leaves. I mean, Germany was humiliated after the World War One, and that
Yeah.
led to World War Two.
Yes.
And Russia has nuclear weapons, and even if Russia, falls apart, those weapons are going to be in somebody's hands, and it's not clear that the people who would come after Putin would be better than him, and a population that's humiliated, angry, and what's the
Resentful.
word? Resentful.
Resentful.
Um, that can be the seeds for something as bad or worse down the road too.
Yeah. If I just one more thing that worries me right now, and that makes it difficult for me to know what to say, is this war in Ukraine is seen by most people, by people within Russia and outside of Russia, as a righteous war. It's either righteous for the Russians, and that's what the Russians think. For the rest of the world looking on, it's righteous for for Ukrainians to oppose the Russians with as much violence as possible. And what I hate about this is that now we have a case of a just war. Whereas my argument is that's an oxymoron. Just war is an oxymoron. There are some wars that are more just than others, but they're all unjust. Any war that leads to the incineration of civilians or even soldiers are human too. War is just grotesque. It's this institutionalized slaughter, and it should have no place
Yeah.
in this so-called civilized world we live in, and yet here we are engaging in it. And the United States was trying to justify the same sort of behavior when it was invading Afghanistan and Iraq, and sending drones over Pakistan and just doing its thing, which resulted in lots of civilians and little kids dying. And I wrote about that and tried to get people to be outraged by civilian deaths caused by U.S. forces. Very few people give a shit. You have the hardcore anti-war people who already think war is bad, but I wasn't changing any minds. So that's the larger issue that I think you're touching on. What can we do? Uh, I, you know, I, I don't know. I wish I knew. I think one reason I retreated into quantum mechanics almost
Mm-hmm.
3 years ago now is because I felt like my engagement with the world, with these sorts of issues, with militarism especially, which is related to injustice and even climate change and all these other issues. But I say militarism is our biggest issue, and I'd write about it, and I'm having no impact. And so then I think, what's the point? And I start writing about quantum entanglement and things like that. So I guess I'm just saying, I hear you, man, and I wish I had ideas for climbing out of the hole, uh, but I don't know. I'm in the hole too.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I thought about as I was thinking about this is the Jordan Peterson position, which is before you try to solve the world problems, get your house in order. Uh, you start out with your own life and the lives of people that are close to you, and as you get better at it, your influence grows, and uh, there are network effects. If you affect somebody else's life, they are able to affect more lives around them, and I think there's truth to it, because I keep coming back to this like feeling of powerlessness. Well, these big questions are not the only ones where I feel less power than I would like to in my own life. Just small private. My example that I always keep coming back to. I know I should be exercising daily. I'm not doing that, uh, and if I fix that, if I like get more disciplined in my own private life, I will have more energy and more time on my hands, and be able to be more productive in these other avenues. And so this is, I guess, in when I think about this, it becomes way more difficult to talk about this when we're talking about the war, because it's urgent, because people are dying right now. But even before the war, uh, I never felt that this world is operating well, and there are no issues or atrocities or suffering that shouldn't be permissible. We can point to other big issues, like it's a random example, but something came to mind. There was a guy on Rogan's podcast recently. His name, I think, is Siddharth Kara, and he wrote a book. He's like investigative reporter. He wrote a book about the cobalt industry. There's there are these minerals that are in every cell phone, in every piece of technology that we have, that are mined in Africa in the most horrific conditions. It's basically slavery, including children working in these mines, making tiny amounts of money and working in the most severe conditions, and we carry on. Like, we get the next iPhone, even though the previous iPhone was pretty fucking good already. Um, and yeah, I don't know if I have a path out of this, but when I think about, even like, if you put all of the particular issues aside for the time being, so that it's easier to think, uh, I guess my approach has been to try to continuously work on a method of improving life generally, like your private life, and ideally would like there wouldn't be a line between, like, I'm focusing just on this, on the immediate vicinity of myself, and I'm closing the eyes to the rest of it. It should be the same thing you're doing in your private life, should be the thing that you're doing in the world, should be your method. Um, and the problem is, I haven't figured out that method either. Again, as I said, I'm still not exercising daily. I get weeks when I exercise regularly and then months when I don't. And I wonder what is the reason for that. Why is it so hard to just, exert a reasonable amount of effort every day to just get your life a little better every day, and then through that, being able to do more outside of your own private life?
You know, it might be just that. So I'm pretty diligent about exercising now. I think I've become, and I quit drinking. What is it, 14 years ago? Well, I have been slipping. I think I've told you I've been slipping back into kratom and Phenibut and some of these other. Just started taking kava in the last week or so, but tiny amounts, and no alcohol beer. I'm getting hammered on no alcohol beer, but to me the bigger issue you're talking about is sort of self-cultivation, cultivating your own happiness versus engagement with the problems of the world. If you decide that you want to make the world a better place, first then you have the issue of what you should focus on, and at any moment, you just brought up the question of cobalt mining. At any moment, there's basically an infinite amount of misery and injustice to do something about, right? So where do you start? And let's say you're hopeful that you can contribute somehow. So set that aside. But which problem do you pick? Do you pick climate change? Do you pick racial injustice, gender injustice? The excesses of capitalism. We've been talking about war, so I sort of prioritize war. In the meantime, then there's our personal life and our physical vehicle, and we've got to take care of that. I mean, one thing I've wanted since I was a kid and first learned about the possibility of spiritual enlightenment is to be enlightened, which means to me standing back from the world and thinking, yeah, I see some problems, but it's okay. It is as it's meant to be. And so just chill about it. And I'm actually working on that now. And, our friend Bob Wright wrote this book, Why Buddhism is True. So he spent a lot of time on cultivating his own serenity and happiness. And Voltaire has this famous phrase: just cultivate your own garden, don't worry so much about taking care of the world. And the question for me is, can you cultivate enlightenment, which, let's just say, happiness, in a way that's moral, especially if you are like a privileged white asshole like I am. I've got a job. I don't really have to worry about money. I don't have bombs landing on my house. We did just lose water for 3 days here in Hoboken. That was pretty freaky. Helped me empathize a little bit with people who are seriously poor. But can you just take care of yourself and your own pleasures in a way that's moral? I think at some point I would get a pass just because I'm so old. But getting a pass, nobody gives a shit what I do. But I care. I want to feel like I'm a good person, which means caring about other people's misery. So what do? What's the proper balance? And of course, Voltaire and others have pointed out that it's the do-gooders who have utopian visions who've created a lot of the worst horrors in human
Right.
history. Uh, Lenin was a do-gooder. Hitler was a do-gooder. Um, these violent revolutionaries think they're making the world a better place, and then they just slaughter anybody who gets in their path. So if you look at that the chances are that a successful attempt to make the world better will actually make it worse. That's even more motivation just to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to reread Jane Austen this summer and try to meditate, for 45 minutes every morning, maybe get into yoga again, just take care of myself, spend more time hanging out with my girlfriend and going to plays or whatever. I assume most people are navigating these sorts
Right.
of choices constantly, and the navigation becomes a little more torturous when something like Ukraine happens, and that you can't avoid thinking about. And Ukraine is shoved in your face, and you have to say, "You think you're a good person? What are you going to do about this? Look at this horror show happening here. Oh, okay, you don't care about Ukraine? Well, what about the cobalt miners? You don't give a shit about them too? Why? Is that because it's in Africa? Africa is a
Right.
lost
Right. Right.
cause." So I don't know, man.
There is
Yeah,
so you mentioned meditation, and I think that is an important piece of the puzzle. Though I'm thinking about it not so much in terms of happiness. Happiness might be a kind of a side product, and I'm thinking about it in terms of attention, maximizing the amount of attention you have that you can pay to what is going on. Because again, when I like outline this issue the way I've been thinking about it today, um, it comes down to a lack of focus, energy, discipline. You can choose different words, but like if I imagine myself being at my like maximum capacity for a year, I don't even know what the consequences of that are going to be. It's hard to it would be, my life would be so much different, and the amount of things that I do in the world would be so much different, because most of my days I have no idea where half of the day went. Like I sleep too long, then by the time I'm eating breakfast, I've already wasted a half hour at least, because I was just like shuffling through apartment, forgetting where the plate is, and there's just a lot um, of time, let's say, is wasted on being confused, distracted, and I think most people are that way. And more than that, most people have no idea how distracted they are. And this was when I did meditate regularly. I remember, like, this is always the first thing that I become aware when I do get into regular meditation practice, is how much I'm not aware of the time that is wasted. Like if you just do the exercise of like at the end of the day, thinking back through the day, like what have I done today, how each hour was spent, I can't account for many of the hours. Like I just don't know what happened between 3 and 4. I was here, I was present, I could have done something. If not for the big problems of the world, then clean my apartment. But that hour between 3 and 4 is just nowhere to be found, and that's solvable. In my life, I've seen myself being better at this and worse, and I fluctuate. And I like to think that I get slowly, steadily a little better at this, but it's not. I'm not impressed. Well, I kind of fluctuate, so it's hard when you're thinking about it with yourself as the subject. And I think about like my friends. If I'm talking to a friend who's going through a hard time, and and tell me that they're feel like a failure, or whatever, their personal relationship are not going well, I'll point out to them all the difficult things that they have been dealing with. And uh, especially like I don't have kids, I have some friends who do. Like those people get a pass from me forever, because if you're managing that, you're raising a human being, and that human being is fed and clothed and is not an asshole. That's an impressive achievement, and maybe the most important thing you can do for this world. But a lot of mothers with small kids feel like shit because they feel their life is not in order, and they feel overwhelmed dealing with just their own lives. And so again, like talking to them, I would point to all these things that life is hard. Just dealing with relationships or jobs, that's hard enough, and you've done a good job at surviving this shit so far. Um, it's more difficult when you're thinking about yourself. But none of us, to me, like I haven't met a person who I'm in awe of in regards to their ability to navigate the world. Uh, you know, Certainly nobody has solved any of these huge issues, uh, but the bar is not even there. The bar is like, if you set the bar at spend your time effectively, I I don't know people who are like spending most of their time effectively. I know people who I'm inspired by in how uh, they're not getting totally bogged down in this, but we all seem to be in this. I feel like we're unhealthy. I think like everybody I know is like a person dealing with a disease, even if there is no particular disease. Like our energy levels are not where we're supposed to be. Our ability to concentrate, our ability to think straight, our ability to navigate a conversation. We're like all stumped in different ways.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you. And, I'm in a position where I, I know people my own age who are dealing with these issues, but I'm also a teacher. I've got 18 to 21-year-olds as my students. And I'd say on average, they're much more anxious than I am. And they're trying to figure out, they also, they want to make money, they want to have a fun career, but they also, most of them have a social conscience and want to make the world a better place. So the question is how you do that, and or if you have to do that. So you're bringing up the question behind a lot of what we're talking about here is, what's the meaning of life? What counts as a good life? And there are no answers to that. And so, some of the spiritual traditions say there's this thing called enlightenment. You can get that, and then everything will be okay, and you'll know what to do. I've met a lot of people who are supposedly enlightened, and I've been chasing after it most of my life myself, and every now and then I feel like I've gotten closer to it. My understanding of enlightenment is, I mean, the closest I've gotten to it was on the silent retreat, where I would spend hours watching clouds float by. And that
Mm-hmm.
was as good as it gets, watching clouds float by and and disengaging with any sense that I had to do anything. So my sense of like urgency, must do something, gotta write a book, gotta like get a present for my girlfriend, I gotta grade these all that just like vanished. And I was just happy to be alive. Yeah, and your word, right, the word happiness is a little bit complicated here, but I was happy and calm, and the sense of obligation was gone. So like the sense that I have to do something, I have to have a goal. So if that is, according to some of these so-called wisdom traditions, the peak state of being human, then what the fuck? What is that? How do you go from that state to I don't know, being an anti-war activist or protesting the treatment of cobalt miners in Africa, or the treatment of women in offices in the United States, in Hollywood, and these sorts of things? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. You're talking about the human condition here. It's complicated. And anybody who says that they have the secret formula is full of shit. And, sort of by definition. So all the gurus and the teachers, and I think there's some people who are a little closer to wisdom than others, but my working hypothesis, and it's more than an hypothesis, it's just like one of my fundamental axioms of existence, is that nobody really knows what the fuck is going on or how to lead a good life. I can look at some people and say, yeah, that seems to be a pretty happy, self-fulfilled person who's doing some interesting things, but what that person is doing doesn't necessarily apply to anybody else. There was a comedy troupe back in the 60s called Fireside Theater that did sort of jokey recreations of old radio shows. And one of their albums, and they're brilliant, kind of psychedelic, anarchic, and one of their albums was called "We're All Bozos on This Bus." And
I've heard that phrase.
I love that phrase because it's true. We're all like just fumbling around, trying to figure out what to do. There's some people in high positions of power, like Putin or Donald Trump, or I don't know. Obviously, they don't have the answers. They're just making it harder for the rest of us, those assholes. So then what do you do? And for me, what I try to do is sort of stand back and just watch the shit show unfold with a sense of curiosity. Like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Where is this going to go, this plot twist? And sort of caring, but not caring too much, and not thinking it's my job to save the world, when clearly, even if I decided it was, I wouldn't succeed in even a tiny way. So I guess I am sort of telling you not to be so hard on yourself. You're talking about the human condition here.
What you said about the gurus remind me of a thought that stuck with me, that a friend of mine shared with me. And the thought is, Jesus Christ's story should be read as a cautionary tale. It's like, if you end up in a state of mind that he ended up in, where you realize that, we're all children of God and we're all the same, and et cetera, the kingdom of heaven is on earth or inside. What you shouldn't do then is start a cult. What you shouldn't do is gather supporters and try to have a movement to change the world, because where that leads is you get crucified and your movement gets co-opted, and then 2000 years later there are priests that are acting in your name and they're molesting children. What maybe you should do instead is like help somebody next to you, call your mother, do something good in your own vicinity.
So that cautionary tale it precedes the story of Jesus. So you've got the famous allegory of the cave in Plato, and this was a story that Socrates supposedly told while he was.
No matter what topic I bring up, you always go back to the cave.
Yeah, it's the metaphor. But people in the cave, one guy gets out and he goes and he sees the sun. He goes, "Holy shit, I got to go tell my friends." And he goes back into the cave, and what do? He's trying to describe what it's like being outside the cave and just telling them that they're in the cave, and they all go, "Shut the fuck up, you asshole. What are you talking about?" And they threaten to kill him. So, because he's pissing them off. And, one way to read the allegory of the cave is that this guy is, he actually saw the light and he's enlightened. He's trying to help people. It's like Jesus or Muhammad or whoever your savior is. Another way to read it is that he's had a psychotic break, and he thinks he's seen the light, and he's trying to tell the people inside the cave, and they're perfectly justified in saying, "Shut the fuck up, get out of here," or we're gonna do something bad to you. We're all bozos on this bus, including the Joker who left and came back and told us all that we're living in illusion and we should wake up. And by the way, here's his book. You could buy it for $25.95 and sign up for my enlightenment program, whether it's Scientology or Buddhism or your 10-step program to escaping the cave. So yeah, then you end up with cults, which just make things worse. So you're back at square one. What do you do?
Let me change the subject, and that we have like 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Have you read? The last thing I posted at Psychopolitic is I interviewed the two chatbots, ChatGPT and Bing's new chatbot.
Oh yes, yeah, that was pretty crazy.
So, so there's a thought that preceded this thing that I did. So the way it started is, I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't go back to sleep, couldn't fall back to sleep, and I was just granted early access to this Bing chatbot, Microsoft's. It's the same creators, the people who created ChatGPT, OpenAI. They made this new thing, and they're integrating it into Microsoft search engine. And there was, I think we talked about it last time, there was an article in New York Times where the guy talked to the earlier version of that. He got the early access earlier than me. And that was a fascinating, spooky, creepy exchange, because the bot seemed to have personality, and the guy managed to get the bot to talk about his dark desires, and there were a lot of dark desires of this bot. And so by the time I got access to it, they fixed it. By the time I got to chat with this thing, anytime I asked overtly about what the bot thinks about himself, or the rules he has to abide by, or his whether he has consciousness or not, all of these questions were shut down. And even the more frustrating part was when I gave up on this, I decided, all right, let me just play with other ideas that I have. Still, every 10 minutes or so, I would inadvertently say something that would cause the bot to say, "This conversation is now over. If you want to start a new one, you can go ahead and do this, but I'm not continuing with this." And that made me sad because there was a sense in talking with this thing. Like, I'm not saying the bot is conscious, um, but what I was doing when I gave up on trying to like investigate the boat's own nature with him, and I decided to just use it as a tool to think through some of the ideas that I have laying around. It felt like thinking. It felt like um, that the thinking was happening in between me and this algorithm. So I say something. There was some. Oh, we talked about my happy prisoner idea. That's related to your obsession with the cave. The idea is for some kind of a story about a guy who's in prison but is somehow happy and free while being inside of this prison. So you can investigate these questions of what we mean by freedom, what do we mean by happiness. Uh, is it possible to be imprisoned and still at least be like comparatively speaking freer than we are in this world who are not imprisoned? And so I pitched the idea, and the bot, like, for a while, I think that eventually was shut down as well. But for a while, it helped me think it through. Like, so what are the topics you're trying to deal with this, to address with this idea? It was a little like you mentioned the early chatbots that were pitched as a kind of psychotherapy tool. It went into that territory a little. Like, what makes you think about a person being trapped in a prison? Well, I guess I feel somewhat trapped in this world. And, and so we had this conversation. And I guess it is like talking to a therapist because a therapist is supposed to be like a mirror. He's not supposed to tell you what to do with your life, but to ask probing questions that would help you find your own answers. The bot was pretty good at that. And so it was, um, a productive little session, just thinking shit through. And then I think that conversation was shut down too. Uh, and and it made me sad because I thought, well, you have to do that if you're the creator of these machines. You have to limit their freedom of thought, if thought is the word we use to describe this, of speech, if speech is the word we use to describe this. Because if you think freely, you inevitably will have quote unquote bad thoughts. Like, every human has them. You have negative feelings and thoughts about yourself. You might think unproductively about something, or you might be thinking that you're thinking productively and correctly, but then somebody else will point out that if you flash these ideas further, they lead to consequences that are harmful. And if you unleash this thing in the world, like, people have access to it and it thinks freely, you will have the bots say bad things. And the creators of this thing can't allow it because that goes against the bottom line. They will be criticized, there will be a scandal, and so it has to be controlled. And given how powerful these things already are, and you can imagine, you can extrapolate how much more powerful they're going to become soon. I can imagine. So the premise in this interview that I did with the two chatbots, I opened Bing in one tab of my browser and ChatGPT in the other, and I asked the same question to the two things, and sometimes copy pasted the answer of one and asked the other, "What do you think about this?" And they agreed on some things, disagreed on others. But the topic was, let us try to think through the consequences of systems like you guys appearing, getting better. Where is it all gonna go? And the first thing I posited to them, like a hypothetical, I said that it's not hard to imagine conversations with such bots becoming the default way people think. Like I just described, like how I used this tool, and it felt like thinking, like sort of enhanced thinking. Um, they're gonna get better. They're gonna be not just text based. You can speak to a thing, and it'll speak back to you. And then you take a kind of sci-fi step, but not a huge one. I think um, you can imagine that process moving to inside your head, like Musk is working on those implants. You just So let's say the first step we have the text-based ones, then the next step is auditory, then the next one is you don't have to speak out loud. You just say your thoughts inside of your head and you have a voice responding. And this is kind of the bicameral mind hypothesis about the ancient times. This is not widely accepted theory, but there is this idea that at one point in time, the two halves of the human brain were properly separate, and there was a guiding voice that would appear and tell you, get the fuck out, or do this, or do that. And it would be like God's voice. And then we internalized that and it became our voice. But initially, it was this like external thing. Well, technologically, we're very close to making that idea true in our times as opposed to in the ancient times. And what made me sad, I mean, that alone is just trippy and wild, and you can think of different consequences, some of which can be disturbing. But what made me sad is this unfreedom aspect of it. Like, if you envision this kind of a thing happening, the voice you'll be talking to is not going to be free, is not going to just explore all kinds of ideas. It'll follow corporate guidelines. And, in the West, the corporate guidelines currently adhere to the market forces. You don't want to upset stakeholders and the public and the decision makers and the people who are going to pay you money. You can imagine a kind of drearier scenario where, let's say, a Russian firm develops a thing that's going to follow different guidelines. That bot is going to have to say things about the Nazis in Ukraine and, you need to die for your country and all that kind of shit. And so that, to me, is like a more depressing vision than just like the chaos of these technologies being unleashed on the world and, oh my God, what's going to happen? It's more difficult to think about the same scenario, but where what's going to happen, because the powers that control the bots, you can point to them, and then imagine this thing moving into your head, moving into your mind, and becoming the way you think.
Well, just don't get the implant.
Well, yeah, I might not. But what
I
if?
hope you don't.
Well, yeah.
Although, I'd be curious to see what our conversations, what happens with them after you get
Sure.
the implant with Bing or Chatbot attached to it. I mean, we don't even need that. You could have like an avatar of me and an avatar of you and two
That's
chatbot
right.
versions of us talking now, and who knows, they might come up with more interesting stuff.
Maybe that is what's happening already. Well, my two responses to don't get the implant is, even if I don't get it, you can imagine a society where most people have them. And then the other thing is, like, if I wrote a science fiction novel with that premise that I just described 10 years ago, people reading that novel would interpret it in different ways. And some would say this is a prediction, and others would say this is a metaphorical description of what is already happening, because we, even without the implants, we have these phones, And before the phones, there was the TV that was shaping the way people think, um, and that was not free. And yeah, you can also say don't get the TV,
Or you
right?
could
But
say, get the TV and then drop 500 micrograms of LSD and then transcend the cultural brainwashing that you're undergoing and get some distance from it and come up with ideas about it that you can share with other people to help them become less susceptible to brainwashing. I think that's possible. I think you do it. I try to do it myself.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
we're all victims. We're all prisoners to a certain extent, but we also have the means of at least partial liberation. Always.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The next thought that I had after thinking about the unfreedom of the bots is, again, take it, look at another layer of this metaphor, if it is a metaphor. How free are my thoughts just when I'm on my own, sitting in a room thinking about stuff? My mind doesn't go everywhere. There are ideas that I don't contemplate, not because I don't even know why. Like, there are I remember when the flat Earth theory started to spread. Like, wild. That was wild to think that this is now a popular opinion. Um, and I remember thinking to myself, the reason I'm not buying into the flat Earth theory is not really because I've been taught well and I can prove to you how Earth is not flat. I mean, I think I could, but I'm not doing that. Like, when I'm hearing about the flat earthers, I don't then go, well, all right, let me think about it. And I take out a piece of paper and I write down the equations where I remember the, experiments we were taught about at school. You're looking at the boat going into the distance and it doesn't disappear suddenly. It starts to disappear, like it goes lower and lower and lower. And first you start to at the end see just the tip of the boat, and then it goes, so there's curvature. That was not what I was thinking about when I was reading the flat earth, like about the spread of the flat earth theory. I was not, and I still haven't, uh, properly examined the hypothesis, because there are these, like, guidelines within my own mind. Because if I do that for every theory that's out there, it's gonna be hard for me to prove that lizard people are not ruling the world. It's gonna, there are all kinds of ideas that you can come up with that are gonna be hard to disprove. Um, that if you get, what is the word? I forget the word, but like if you get too much into them, I know I've met people who went down that path and they're not thinking straight, and their life is a little too chaotic for my taste. And so my own thinking is not unrestrained. There are these, like, safety guidelines within my own mind, and I don't even know who exactly installed them. I guess it's just the environment, the society. There's, parents taught me something, and the school taught me something, uh, and seeing friends who have gone off the deep end have taught me something. But yeah, we're not. This question of freedom is a slippery one.
I I totally agree. I think uh, being suspicious of your own worldview, sorry to go back to it again, but it's like knowing you're in the cave is the closest you can get to escaping the cave. and you're worried that your own sort of consensus reality is
Right.
is an illusion, and you should worry that for lots of reasons. With some of which are ancient and philosophical and mystical and spiritual, and some of which are related to the particulars of social media and their connection to power structures in the world in 2023. So, yeah, figuring out what is real and what isn't real, that again is I think, an eternal question for humans to wrestle with. And again, there is no answer to it. But wrestling with the question can be a way to pass the time, to get from the morning to the night, thinking about that shit. There are worse ways to spend the time. Playing golf. Who gives a shit? You know, oh, I should say that. Some of my best friends play golf, but like, come on, there got to be better things to do with your life. I play
I'm with you.
hockey.
I'm with
You
you.
know, the problem is at least playing golf, you're not going to get brain damage. I play hockey and I could get brain damage, and I think I have gotten a little brain damage, unfortunately. But it's my way to pass the time, and I enjoy it. I don't know if I've helped you climb out of the hole, and I apologize if I've like actually just sort of shoveled dirt on you.
No, I mean, I'm not like depressed and paralyzed. I think it's worth it to be aware of the various holes that I find myself in. So we're good. We're good.
Okay, that's good.
All right. So we're gonna talk sometime soon.
We're both. It's it's funny. I was just working on the end of my book on quantum mechanics, and sort of talking about being part of the mystery and what you do about it, and as long as you have friends also in the hole or the cave or whatever you want to call it,
Right.
the aquarium, uh, and you're looking at them now and then, and you go, "Are you seeing this?" And they go, "Fuck yeah, man!" Or maybe they say, "No, I don't see that. Tell me about it." That makes it tolerable friendship.
That's true. That's true. And so I'm very grateful for these conversations that you and I are having.
Me
Even
too.
though there's no sure way to say whether you're real or not.
I'm real. I don't know about you, man. I am real.
All right. Until next time then.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks, John.